Thanks for checking out this episode of the Always Forward podcast. This community exists for everyone, whether you're an elite athlete, fitness enthusiast, business owner, leader, student, parent, or pretty much anything else. This content is for you. What unifies our listeners is a passion to improve themselves in order to impact the world. Make sure to check out our website and follow us on Instagram for more content like workouts, previous episodes, and articles. Also, make sure to visit our online store for Always Forward apparel and other merchandise. This episode is a part of our Be More Human series. In this series, we are focusing on different aspects of what it means to be human, how we've strayed from our original design, and helpful ways to take back control of our lives by living with passion and purpose. If you enjoy the episode, take a second to leave us a review and share it with a friend.
Before jumping into the show, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Pursue Outfitters and Tennessee Pre. Check out Pursue Outfitters apparel at pursueoutfitters.com. Check out Tennessee Pre. Unstack your stack with Tennessee Pre. Your focus and energy will be incredible.
All right, guys. Welcome back to the Always Forward podcast. Thanks for listening today. Today we are with John Hipp. I got to meet John back in February, again, down in Miami at Wadapalooza. So John, just fill us in a bit about who you are, kind of what you do a little bit, and we'll just start there and kind of proceed.
Awesome. Thanks, Jameson. Good to be with you guys today.
Yeah.
We met, just a few months ago. But we really connected we were at the Faith RX event and just started to ask some questions just about rest and how, you're a high powered guy. You like to always be doing stuff, always moving. Yeah. I'm kind of the same way. This whole pandemic has slowed me down a bit, which has been great, but we connected over that. Definitely, obviously faith and fitness, but a little bit about me. My name's John Hipp. I was born in a small town in Pennsylvania, grew up, oldest of four. I was homeschooled my entire life until about, 18, until 12th grade. Ended up going out to school to Pepperdine University in Malibu, California, and studied finance, and then got a job at a bank, working behind a desk, suit and tie every day. And it was just a few months in that I realized I was like, it just felt like my soul was being sucked out. I was just like, man, is this what life is about? And really got to a point where I just, there was one moment, and, I was sitting at my desk, and, I had kind of tried to apply for other jobs and to go in different directions and kind of within the same kind of finance space, maybe out of the bank, but still kind of in that same kind of being at an office, doing the same thing every day with the same people, and I remember there was one moment at my desk, and I was just, thinking about this and just trying to figure it out, and just honestly felt like it was like the voice of God, the Holy Spirit, like knocked me back in my chair. I'll never forget this moment. And just felt or heard this voice, do you trust me? Do you trust me? And it was like God just saying over and over again, do you trust me? And I was like, it's one of those questions where like, you're just kind of speechless, and you're like, well, I prayed the prayer to accept Jesus into my heart when I was 8 years old. Yeah. And I grew up in a Christian home, went to a Christian university. I look back at my life, and it's like this picture of safety and security, and this job working at a bank in the corporate world, like I have benefits, paycheck every 2 weeks. And it was just like, no, God, I don't, because I'm living in fear of actually stepping out and following the dreams that you've put in my heart. That's what I kind of came to realize. And, we'll get into this. We'll talk more about identity later, but just that really trusting God with your life. And I think, just in the actuality. And it seems, as I look back, I'm like, man, it's like all the blessings and all the privileges and incredible blessing it is to live in this country that we do. And this was like the big fear and the big step that I took, but it was huge for me back then. And I was like, after that moment, it was just like, I got serious. I'm like, man, what does it really mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to follow God? And just really started to feel this sense of God calling me out of the known into the unknown, right? The known being this, this safety, security of my job, and just the stability of my family life, which I'm extremely grateful for. I don't want to,
Right.
not knocking that at all. It was just felt God, that kind of call. And it was actually at the same time that I had started, a friend invited me to this Bible study called Models for Christ.
Okay.
And there, I think I've told you about this, but it's a ministry, it's a community for people in the entertainment and fashion industries. It's worldwide, global. We have, chapters in most major cities, and there was one in LA, and the global directors happened to be there at that chapter just for a period of time. And it was just this community that was, it was the first time going to a Bible study consistently after I had gotten out of the house, after college. And a friend invited me, and
Cool.
after a while they I shared that I hated my job and I wanted to, figure something else out and leave. And they were like, well, have you thought about modeling? And I'll never forget, he's like, cause you have
so at this point, you were going to this group before you were even in the industry.
This is how I got into modeling.
Okay.
Actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, no,
right.
It's crazy. I mean, not all the time is it people outside of the industry, but my great friend of mine ended up inviting me. I went, and at a certain point, one of the leaders was like, have you thought about modeling? Because you have a look, and there's not a lot of Jesus in fashion.
Yeah.
And so I always look back, and when I share that, people tend to chuckle. They're like, really? Models for Christ? Like, what is that? They're like, is there more of an oxymoron? but no, it was so cool how God kind of used that time and that transition to build up this community around me. And what you shared with me earlier just about community, it's so important. And before that, I'd been into triathlons, and I still am, but triathlons and running and marathons, it's very individual sport. And it's a very you're on the bike for hours, like you're sitting in the saddle by yourself for hours, like by yourself with your own thoughts. And so I took a lot of pride in my independence, in my, individuality. And so God kind of had to break me of that, or just introduce me to actual real biblical community before. And it was beautiful, because it was like before I got into modeling. And then because in the past, however many years, I've been all over the world, lived all over the world, traveled, and it's been, if I hadn't learned the power of community, it could have been very dangerous. Not that it wasn't dangerous, and just potentially just a lot of traps and snares, but in everywhere I've gone since then, I've done my best to invest in community and build community, and also stay plugged in virtually.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. So before we get into a little bit of just kind of honing in on some of the stuff that you just said, that you just shared, what are just some really practical things that you've experienced so far? So, I mean, obviously you're both kind of paired in the fitness industry as well as the fashion modeling industry.
Right.
And so what's kind of your resume? What are things that you've done recently, like that people would be aware of, or anything like that? Like, so I know you've traveled a lot, you spent a lot of time even in Dubai. So just share a little bit just about that actual practical experience.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So after I quit my job at the bank, moved home to Tennessee. My family was in Tennessee at the time. And then went up to Chicago, and kind of working. I was a barista at a coffee shop, a janitor at a yoga studio, and teaching CrossFit and group fitness, while I was trying to make it as a model and figure that out. And so, but from there, and in Chicago, it's a lot of catalog. I kind of purposely didn't go straight to New York, because I wanted to just kind of break myself in. and just because I just heard a lot about the industry. I was a little hesitant. I was, from small Pennsylvania, like, getting into modeling. And so anyway, was in Chicago, worked for clients like just catalog client like Bonton or stuff like that, and then ended up getting a gig down in Dallas, in Texas, working a lot for JCPenney. So I worked for JCPenney a lot down there.
Cool.
Dallas, went to Miami overseas, and when I was overseas, I was living in Italy and Germany and London. And one of the things I've gotten to do is I actually got to walk the runway for Dolce & Gabbana, and
Nice.
I closed their show in Naples, Italy. For their
Wow.
Alta Sartorio show, which is it's like a month after Fashion Week, Men's Fashion Week, which is in late May, early June in Milan.
Okay.
And they took 99 guys down. They had a 4-day show. They spent probably €1 million in this entire show. And the men's show was Saturday night. We went like 6 a.m. on a bullet train from Milan to Naples. And I closed the show of 99 guys. I was the last guy to walk. We walked down this ramp through like this castle and then out to this terrace along the water.
Yeah.
And then after I, got to the end of the line, Domenica Dolce and Stefano Gabbana walked out like to fireworks behind us over the water.
That is nuts.
It was like,
yeah.
It was like, it felt like a dream. It felt like a dream. It was, so that was,
right. Yeah.
That was a cool kind of highlight.
For sure. Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that honestly, so, I mean, I know that you've continued to travel, you've continued in that industry. I've seen some of the projects that you've posted about and stuff recently, but I think that being kind of a penultimate example of just your experience so far is really helpful, just so people have some context of, not to be degrading at all towards anybody else who is passionate about this and pursues it this way. But, I guess a lot of people could consider themselves like Instagram models.
Yeah.
And so just the fact that you're actually in the industry, you have a certain level of success and notoriety, that experience is helpful. Just, I think people have that context, knowing this conversation comes from that perspective, not from the, you post selfies and have the light selfie cam or whatever. So, I just think that's helpful.
Yeah. God's really opened some awesome doors, in that context, and just allow me to, I've been, I lived in Hamburg, Germany, in Milan, Italy, in London. Then I went to Dubai. First I went to Turkey, to Istanbul, which is one of the most, if I could recommend anywhere going, it's just one of the most fascinating cities.
Yeah, but
and I would say fascinating countries. And you probably know this, but I think something like 75% of the New Testament took place in modern day Turkey.
Right.
Abraham's birthplace is in southwest Turkey.
Just so much, much actual history connecting faith to just actual historical reality at that point. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. Walking in Cappadocia.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Pretending I was Peter.
Pretending
I was like receiving the First Peter. It was awesome.
Nice, man. All right, well then let's circle back around a little bit. So this whole series, the whole Be More Human series, the concept behind this is trying to compel people, educate people, encourage people to stop doing exactly what it sounds like you were doing when you graduated college and were working at the bank, which is just this redundant, debilitating, systematic approach to life. This reality of, I'm doing the 9-to-5 thing, and this is just what makes sense. And you have so many conversations with people that end up saying at the end of the conversation, man, I wish I could do something else. I just don't know how, or I don't know what else to do. And so it sounds like you had a very clarifying moment in your life, or at least a clarifying experience in your life, where you decided you were going to take back control of that, which in a cool way simultaneously meant letting go of control of some things.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. And I think that tension exists a lot, and people fail to recognize that. But it sounds like you had that very clarifying experience to where it was, all right, I'm not living my next 50 years just to get to retirement,
Yeah.
and so
that was my worst nightmare, was waking
yeah,
up 10 years later and still being there.
right, exactly. Which I think is I think it would do so many people so much good to be willing to go there, to get to that point. And maybe it doesn't end in a job transition. Maybe it doesn't end in a career change. Maybe it just ends in a perspective. Yeah, it could just be a different perspective on what they're doing, living with a little bit more purpose. But that whole be more human concept that we're trying to lean into is just, from your perspective and my perspective, we know that we were created, that we have a body and a mind, and yes, but we also have a spirit and a soul. But there has to be some reason that we were created human, we were created for a very specific impact.
Yeah. And each individually.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Sure.
And so it's just that idea of going, okay, from a faith-based perspective, which is what you and I both are, and we live in communities that are that way as well. I see so many people consistently tying their hands behind their backs in inactivity, saying, well, faith is the only thing that will fix it, or people just need more of the gospel or more of Jesus. And while at a base level and a foundational level, and even at the highest level, I suppose you and I would agree with that. But my response to that is often yes, and not but yes, and that means we've got to do something to make that impact.
Exactly.
And so it sounds like faith for you, that clarifying moment for you was from a faith perspective, in which you said, all right, life right now is not going to end in a way and in an impact that I'm going to be fulfilled by or satisfied by.
Yeah.
So you took back control of that. So in
that dichotomy. Yeah. Let's dive into that.
For sure.
And that was definitely, I think, maybe not the first, but one of the first and most powerful moments. That kind of led to that catalyzed me. But I think, and this is where you and I connected, man. And it's that idea of, it's like, yes, we need to do something, but we have to be so sensitive, and we have to make sure the doing is coming from up above. And it's that whole vertical. A friend of mine, a pastor of, it's called ICF Church over they have a bunch of churches all around Europe, and one in Tel Aviv, and some in Southeast Asia. But he's a pastor at a church in Germany, and he gave this sermon called "The Two Dimensions of the Cross," and he talks about the vertical dimension and the horizontal beam.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I might have actually sent this to you, but anyway, it's the righteousness, receiving the righteousness of God, and then the kingdom of God, and then spreading the kingdom. And it's like, we can't sometimes, and it's always a balance, but the first step is always making sure we receive God's righteousness. We know we are covered in Jesus' blood, and we we have the Holy Spirit inside of us, and we're receiving our game plan, right? We can make our plans, but ultimately know who we are in Christ, who He created us to be, and then it's from there that we take action. When we understand that, when we understand that God of the universe names us and has a purpose and a plan for us, it's like, wow, that'll get you wanting to read your Bible. That'll get you wanting to study.
Absolutely. And that will motivate that personal aspect of the personal horizontal aspect of what it means to just live a life of faith and spiritual activity. But I think the other thing that vertical connection will always do is motivate you to make an impact horizontally as well.
Yes.
And so
it comes from that. For sure. 100%.
Yeah. And so I see that you have that, that very, very foundational catalyzing spiritual experience that you're going, okay, so from that experience, I'm going to go out and make a difference. So it's just this concept and this idea that it's the majority of people are not going to make that global impact on a professional ministry level. And so rather than that, how do you make that global impact? How do you make that kingdom even impact in the marketplace that you find yourself in? And so what we want to lean into in conversation with however many people are willing to have the conversation during this series is basically exactly what you're saying. How do you make that horizontal impact in life? Knowing that for you, that vertical is very clear and you know what you need to do to keep that open and healthy.
Right.
What do we do? What do we do to make that horizontal impact in our marketplaces and in what we're called to do? How do we live with purpose and how do we live with passion? And so right now you do that. And I see you do it like as well as you possibly know how. And I think you're always learning.
I'm trying. Always learning for sure. I'm stumbling along the way, but hopefully stumbling forward.
Yeah, exactly. Which is, I mean, all that any of us can hope for. And it is to make an effort. And so I see you making that effort in your industry, being like the the fitness industry, and then the more modeling fashion industry. So all of that essentially to say you have a very secure and connected identity that compels and motivates you. And I was able to have this conversation in our very first episode on this series that
we awesome, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Check it out, guys.
We want to live out of a place not of instinct, but of identity. And so like, we don't want to just be like every other mammal or living, breathing organism that knows what they need to do to survive. We want to live from a place of personal and human identity. Like we were given very, very specific and unique aspects to what makes us us. So all that to say, how do you kind of live into that place of identity in your workplaces? Because I know that it's difficult in the fitness industry. And so
I'm kind of learning that a little bit more.
So let's just talk a little bit about that. So like you're in the fitness industry and you're in the influencer of being a model and being in that even fashion industry as well. And so how do you kind of maintain that sense of identity in your pursuit of fitness and in your even coaching and training of other people?
Well, if you don't mind, if I could kind of start with the fashion side just a little bit, so I can
absolutely,
and then we'll get into fitness, because it kind of all plays into it. But I think I'm really grateful that I didn't get into modeling or fashion before kind of meeting Models for Christ, and it was kind of that was the genesis that launched me into there. Because everywhere I've gone, like every new market I've gone to since then, it's just kind of felt like just something I should do. It like start a chapter if there wasn't a chapter there, like a Bible study, just a Bible study for models and people in fashion. And so that's what I've tried to do. And it's funny how God has, like, my first job in Texas, when I started working for JCPenney was with another client, and it was me and this other guy working on set all day, and found out within a few hours, like, he's a believer. And so it's like, God has this funny way of just like bringing the Christians in the industry, because there's not a lot of us. Trust me.
I can imagine.
You can probably assume that, but he just has an awesome way of just bringing, allowing me to find them pretty quickly, wherever I go. And so, and I guess I'm pretty open to that, and I'm kind of looking for that. And I also try to, every job I go to, just be really, and for me, because it was such a stark contrast from, paycheck every 2 weeks, full benefits, knowing where I was going every single day, to literally, I have no idea where my next paycheck's coming from. I don't know where I'm going to be working. I don't know where I'm going to be. Just completely spontaneous, completely out of left field, a lot of it. And so it was easy for me to see God kind of leading that and guiding that, and very specifically, you know what I mean? Like, if I book a job, I'm like, thanks, God. It's almost like a lot of us in the industry joke, we're like, God's our ultimate booker or agent.
Yeah.
So it's like, if a door opens up, we're like, I go into it with such purpose already and such or anticipation of like, all right, God, like what's our game plan today? Because for me, it feels super specific. It's very, you know, independent contractor, like gig based, like, project based. And so you go into it with okay. And sometimes it's just for one day, I'm just working with this team for one day. So I'm just kind of asking God, and God's, opened up tons of doors to just share little, plant little seeds. But then also with that, I think, and this was just within the past couple months that a dear friend of mine, brother, kind of mentor type guy, shared this with me, especially in light of just with coronavirus and all the riots and just everything that was happening. And just, I think social media it's always kind of been an issue. And we can talk about this more just in terms of identity. Like it's a double-edged sword. It can, it can be used for great good. But it can also drag you down and also just completely screw with your identity and sense of self-worth and just like you can, I'm sure you've experienced, you just scroll and you're just like, I've done nothing with my life. Like,
absolutely,
that's an exaggeration.
Yeah. Or and to that point, if we're both in, I mean, obviously sharing experience in the fitness industry,
right?
And then you in even more so an appearance based industry. Like from that perspective, like that has to be so debilitating. So let's then, so I two questions about kind of identity in the industry.
Okay.
That you're in.
Yeah, sure.
First question. So let's start with like, define the word from your perspective, identity, because that's really the thing we want to try to help guide people to. And clearly, from your case, like as has already been clear, as it always should be for believers, like that's where your identity comes from primarily.
In Christ, right.
Right. But there's also has to be a little bit more of a definable, tangible sense of, okay, then what does that mean? Like, who is John Hipp, or who is Jameson? Oh, I'm a Christian. Okay, cool. What does that mean? Like, how does that actionably flesh itself out in your life? And so, but also to be empathetic to those people that are listening to this that haven't had that sense of spiritual revelation at this point.
Right.
How do we encourage them and guide them to start to live from that sense of an aspect of identity rather than just this instinctual tripping into everything that happens in their life? So from your perspective, kind of just define that word. Identity.
Yeah. I'd say identity for me is like, who I'm created to be by God. What names does God have for me? A powerful another kind of powerful moment in my life was, and I believe I shared this with you, but there's a teacher named Jamie Winship. He has a ministry called Identity Exchange, and I had the privilege to meet him and his wife and about four years ago or so now. And I remember it was at a men's retreat in California, out in San Bernardino, east of LA. And I remember finding out the theme of the weekend on the way out, and it was called How to Hear from God. And I was like, whoa, like this is what I've been trying to figure out my whole life. Because I grew up in a very, very conservative Christian, like Father, Son, and Holy Bible, if that makes sense. Like, really,
absolutely.
He didn't understand the Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit, it can be wild. It can be.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the like risk to your faith comes into play. Is listening to the absolutely.
Yeah. So anyway, so that weekend, and unbeknownst to me going into it, it's like the first question we ask is like, God, what do you want me to know about my identity? What do you want me to know about the names you call me? What names do you call me? And so for me, like that was just kind of, it just takes you back to basics, right? We're so used to, as we're talking about, it's like, we're just going from one thing to the next. We're like, there's so much sensory overload even being in the world, but let alone social media, computers, iPhones, like all of this, we're constantly inundated, news like 24/7.
Yeah.
And so finding, a big obstacle to figuring out who you are and what you're supposed to do is finding that stillness, finding that quietness. That's why, often I'll pray, and, before our call, we pray. It's like, God, quiet my thoughts, silence the enemy. I want to hear from you. Like, I want your voice to be, amidst the world, the voices of the enemy, the voices of comparison. I want your voice to be loudest. And so that kind of started the journey.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, so would you say then that would be the first step to helping guide somebody?
The first step is getting quiet.
Yeah.
Getting quiet.
Sure.
And even, I mean, I'll take it, I'll unspiritualize it. It's like, get quiet and just be with yourself, be with your thoughts. And
be willing to have that sense of self-awareness that you maybe don't have any self-awareness. Like, be honest enough for a moment to go, am I any better than a almost a programmed robot just going through the motions? To your point of just kind of taking the spiritual aspect out of this. I think that even with the spiritual aspect integrated into it, knowing that like it's not separable anyways, you have to I know, but you have to have that sense of self realization, and just be kind enough to yourself and compassionate enough to yourself to be honest about whether or not about whether or not you've been living into your identity, or if you have been living into the identity that somebody else placed on you, or that society has placed on you, or those expectations. Because for you, man, you were for the most part kind of living you were well on your way to fulfilling the American dream.
The corporate job, 9 to 5, like all my bills, I was comfortable. It was almost like I was too comfortable.
Yeah. All you really lacked was at that point was the farmhouse and white picket fence and
the golden handcuffs.
The family and the 2.3 kids, or however that works.
Right.
Yeah. But you were well on your way to that. And then, and that's what society, that's what culture, that's what that sense of expectation would have placed on you. And then it was this shaken up experience of identity that said, that's not me. And in fact, that sense of lazy comfort, in my opinion, isn't anybody's identity. And so
I agree. But that's where I was at.
Yeah. So you would say the first step in people kind of taking ownership of their identity is just to sit still, get quiet, and just be willing to ask the question.
Yeah. Honestly, try and get quiet and drown out as many voices as you can.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, just ask the voice of truth. I believe there's one truth out there. And if you earnestly seek it, and, if you earnestly want to pursue and receive the truth, it will find you. So just be open to that, and just and try and do, like, I do a lot of times, like airplane mode on my phone, definitely overnight, just to get away.
Are there any specific just kind of in that moment of quiet, in that pursuit of, like, let's just say you and I both experience it, that sense of rushed, hurried living outside of our calling and outside of our purpose. Let's say, like, you found that version of you, or I found that version of me. That was just, admittedly kind of miserable.
It was,
and so let's say that we ran into those versions of ourselves now. What questions would you compel that version of you to start asking yourself? Like, what are specific things we can help guide people to ask themselves?
I think, going all the way back to the time at the bank, it's like, it was like me asking God, like, just what things do I need to strip away? What are things that I've placed on top of myself or projected out to the world, that are kind of like, what do you call it? Not crutches, but like almost like armor. What have I put on top of who I really am to project to the world, and to, like the external facade.
A facade. Yeah.
The facade.
Right.
Yeah. So that that's a big one. And then honestly, like, just, in prayer meditation time, asking a big shift for me, about a year after this seminar, was just continuing to ask God, what do you have to say about my identity? What names do you call me?
Hmm.
And then just being still enough and saying, and we've quieted our thoughts, we've silenced the enemy, and asking God to speak. And it's like we're believing in faith. And the first names I started getting, first one was learner, then I got teacher, then I got connector, I got healer, and then like adventurer or doer.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you would say that those are that sense of identity that you gained, and how you're referring to it as like the names that you take on.
Yeah.
Would you say that those are basically now your then guiding principles, your guiding values?
I would say it's like, and I like to share this. It's like, if you get to the end of a day and you're like, man, that was a great day. Analyze. So I would do this.
Yeah.
Why? Okay,
Yeah.
I was learning. I'm definitely learning. If I was teaching someone, or if I was connecting, like now, like I'm on, bro. Like, just even thinking back about how we connected, and like just that connection. If I healing, like healer is for me like fitness or stretching, mobility, teaching people about food and diet. And then adventure. If I'm adventuring, like, I get to the end of that day, I'm like, man, well, that was a good day, because I was operating in all of these spheres of who I am, who God created me to be.
You have a defined sense of identity, and you're living into it, and surprise, life seems to be firing on all cylinders and way more fulfilling whenever you're doing it. Yeah, for sure. So that's really cool. That's really cool, because it's interesting to me, just our differences in how we had that experience. And so, from just my personal sense of growth and development, those clarifying values and those clarifying moments were so much more tangible, I guess you would say, or almost like not so much hyper spiritual as they were practical. And so I knew that I knew that something was off, and I knew that ultimately what my purpose was to like grow the kingdom and glorify the Lord, and to do that by engaging as many people as possible. But then I just sat there going, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do? Because it's not working right now. And so I was just pulling up on my phone. My experience, very similar to yours, was was helpful to me. I listened to a podcast about basically a values-driven existence, in which they define the five P's being purpose, priorities, principles, perspective, and perseverance. So the last two, being perspective and perseverance, are just, for the most part, just your willingness to, very simply, persevere whenever stuff gets hard. None of it really matters unless you're willing to go for it whenever it's difficult, and stand firm when things, and be steadfast when things get tough. But then the perspective is just like, okay, well then, like, what glasses are you viewing the world through? Like, what's that prescription, So those are the last two, but those first ones for me, were like your priorities and your principles, man. So it sounds like
priorities and principles.
Your principles that make you, that are basically this true north, or this basically compass that you're able to live by, are these very definitive aspects of what makes John. For me, are my principles. So like some of mine are, one of them is nothing changes if nothing changes. And so it's just this idea of like, stop doing the same repetitive crap over and over again. Like, if you don't like the results, make adjustments, One of mine is to keep it simple. So stop trying to overdo everything. Like, just focus on, like, don't get distracted by the shiny things, and just focus on the thing that you have your hands on right then. One of mine is fail forwards. So it's just this idea of like, don't get stuck in your setbacks, It's that idea of always failing forwards, and failing often, because that's really the way to make progress. And then, I have a whole list of what these are for me. Spiritually, awesome. One of them, from a spiritually integrated perspective, one of my principles is gospel plus safety plus time. And that is basically the way that comes from an author named Ray Ortland. He's a pastor actually in Nashville. And the concept with that is only talk about the gospel, only preach the gospel. Yeah. And regardless of whether or not it's convicting, it's always good news. So
true.
Only preach the gospel. Safety,
I'm with you.
Safety meaning give people the safety that they need to be themselves. Do not only safe invite space. Them in. Yeah. Create a sense of safety around your community, around your family, and even for yourself. And then time is just this concept of the world doesn't quite work on the same agenda that we have. And so don't rush people to make progress. Don't rush people to change. Don't rush people to grow. Give them as much time as they need for that gospel and that safety to work. So that's kind of a tangent, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about those clarifying principles for you and how it was so different for the two of us. But ultimately,
it's what keeps us going our specific true north.
Yeah, exactly. There is a military leader from the Vietnam War that kind of coined the phrase "Marines don't do that," and I talked about this a little bit in the last episode. But basically, he kept multiple war crimes from happening during the Vietnam War by kind of inundating this culture that says Marines don't do that.
Wow.
And so I don't know what that even really means in total, but what he did was create a sense of identity for those he led, that to where when they were, encountered with a decision to make, it was easy for them to say, Marines don't do that. Or Marines do.
Or they do.
Right.
Marines do that. Yeah.
So you
it's
basically
these guiding principles.
Yep, exactly. So you got your John does that, or John doesn't do that.
Right.
I've got mine.
It makes life a lot easier. Yeah. And it makes life a lot easier. I mean, there's still gray areas. There's still specific situations, but I mean, I can't tell you. Sometimes I'll just go back to if I have a decision to make, I'm I'll just think about those identities. I'm well, is it going that way, or is it a distraction? It may be really cool, really awesome, but it's it's not quite. And also different seasons. There's different seasons that certain parts of my identity are really coming out and shining.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that to that point, you have to be able to navigate the gray area because again, we are human beings, and regardless of how well you can define it, that's the reason my very first principle on my list is to fail forwards, is because I dropped the ball in these guiding principles. Yeah. And I've got to be able to keep going. I just think that's really cool how different it looks. And I know that was not even really on the necessary topic of conversation.
Hey, it was a good nugget.
Yeah.
It's great,
it's
bro.
Good. Yeah, it's helpful. So I think that as we're having this conversation for the idea and the hope that it's helpful for people to get out of maybe those situations you found yourself in at the bank. Yeah. So what are people, what is, if you're listening to this, what is your bank? How do you get out of it? What's that experience for you?
That's a good one.
All right. So defining that sense of identity, connecting it back to your marketplace.
Yep.
You now know what those guiding principles, what that true north is for you. And it doesn't mean that you're allowed to just go out and live a socially completely isolated life. You got to integrate it into your marketplace. You got to make an impact with it.
Right.
So what are kind of your tactics for making an impact? Because like you said, you may only have one day with some people. You may only have one potential exposure to somebody. What are your tactics for taking those guiding principles and integrating them into your marketplace?
So going back to, I think I forgot to finish the example of my friend, what he shared with me when everything was kind of all hell was breaking loose, for lack of a better term. But he just really encouraged me because I was just getting overwhelmed with social media and just, feeling just the weight of having a platform, having a voice, however big or small it was, probably thinking too much of it and being just because I was seeing everybody posting, everybody doing something, I'm oh my God, Like,
What
did
am I
I
doing?
miss something?
Yeah.
What am I doing?
Right.
And so he just really encouraged me. He's like social media is super, you know, in a lot of instances, it's very ineffective for social change. And so, I mean, it can help,
Yeah.
but it can also overwhelm and just create so much noise that no one is ever going to find that quiet time, that stillness to actually be able to figure out what's going on. But so anyway, so he summarized, he was like, think small. He's like, everybody's talking about thinking big and doing big things, and he was just like, think small, be faithful with whoever God puts in front of you that day. You know, just pray over the day. And that's not to say don't do big things, but it's almost like you got to think small, because we're human. We're individual humans on this earth. And it's like, we believe in the power and the control and the sovereignty of God. And so it's like, God's going to do the big things. Let's think small. Let's stay focused on what he's given us within our sphere. Be faithful with that, and then pray big. Think small, pray big, almost. And so that, honestly, it seems simple and a little bit maybe counterintuitive, really helped me in that moment.
So I mean, essentially you've got kind of those guiding principles, those names that you know that you identify as and with, and then it's as simple as going, okay, like John is the connector or the healer, or, you know, this is the identity that you live with. And now it's as simple as, how do those things change my day-to-day interaction? Because that's all you really got to worry about.
Like if if I'm walking down the street and or if I'm like going about my day, I get a text, or there's an opportunity to connect or I'm on set, or there's an opportunity to connect someone. I'm like, you know, someone will say something and it'll trigger something, and I'll think of another person. I'm like, man, maybe they could help each other, so I'll connect them.
Sure.
You know, so that's an example.
Sure.
Or if there's just like, I've always loved to learn. You know,
So I mean, ultimately it's just taking responsibility for the moment, whatever that moment may be.
It is. That's the only thing we control. Amen.
Right.
Dude. You know, the past is gone. Like, you know, God will use that, but, and then the future is yet to be determined. No, we have no idea. You know, we control so little. Yeah. But let's, you know, I think did you say in the last, you talked something about like reacting versus
respond versus react.
Responding versus reacting. But just both of those are, it's like, you know, we can do things, but it's almost like we want to be able to respond more specifically and appropriately in the moment, given the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really good. I think that it's just, you do have to start with that big picture identity question. And then it's all right, then that's excellent that you have so much self-realization, you're so self-understood and you're self-actualized. That's awesome.
Right.
Now what? You know, because your responsibility is the impact. Your responsibility is to make a difference. Your responsibility is to share with others. And so I think that that's a perfect actionable suggestion, is just, okay, then take that sense of identity, take that sense of realization, and now just put it in the moment. This moment, and then the next moment, and then the next moment, and then the next moment. And I think that that's perfect, dude. So similarly, as I think this is super important, because you touched on it a little bit with the social media aspect of things. I am discouraged by this often. How do you wrestle with maintaining that identity and not letting your identity get threatened in two industries, being fashion and fitness, that are so focused on image and performance? I mean, body image, even performance, appearance, comparison.
Yeah.
You know, how do you fight that and wrestle that?
That's huge, man. I'm glad you asked that. I'll share I think before I started modeling, like, I don't think I ever like looked at myself or critiqued my outward appearance. Like it was just so funny, because I'll think back, I'm like, I never used to like look at myself in the mirror and like figure out if I needed to adjust anything, or, you know, it's just I was like, what the heck? And so anyway, so getting into modeling though, it's all about that. And like, you know, my first agent, it's like, you know, he's like, practice in the mirror, practice posing in the mirror, practice, because it's all about just being comfortable in front of the camera. And it, like, the camera sees insecurity, sees every, so it's like part of it
That's
is
nuts.
learning. Oh, it's crazy, bro. Like, I mean, certain clients like JC Penney went through, or certain clients have gone through phases of trying to use just everyday people off the street and not models. And regardless of external appearance, just it being comfortable in front of the camera, it's something it's taken me a long time to really get comfortable with. And so there's that aspect, and then there's just keep staying in the shape I need to be, always being critical of, I mean, my first agent, he at certain points, he's, because I'm an athletic guy, I'm a bigger guy. For a male model, I'm like probably 20 pounds heavier than most. I'm just strong. And I have big legs from cycling back in the day and CrossFit. And so fitting into the pants is sometimes an issue. But I mean, my first agent was like, I know it sounds funny, like even talking about, like, this is silly, but it's just the reality of the industry, to a certain extent. But my first agent, he's like, your legs are too big and your face is fat. Like he would say that stuff. Like, he would say that stuff to me, and it's like, you want to let it just roll off, but when he's kind of the gatekeeper to, your finances, and then sometimes your sense of self-worth, and it's like, and you receive from him, because he was my first agent, and it's like, I didn't know anything about the industry, just a little bit. But so you really you put a lot of weight on his words, and and then extrapolate that to females, and then people much younger than me, because I got into it more into my 20s, and whereas these girls like 14, 15, 16 getting into it, or guys like 17, 18, 19, and it's like, man, it like those words like rip them apart sometimes. And I wasn't even in New York. Like, New York or Europe is brutal. And so that's been just a constant journey, especially the first 3-4 years. And then, social media makes it worse, because then you're going through and you're just like, man, I'm all these people are just super successful, and like, I'm never going to be there. And, you're always comparing yourself. And so that's when it is so important to, remember the only voice that matters is God's voice. And he made you, only you, like, unique among the billions of people that are out there. And understanding that, within the context of the industry, and, having to, fulfill certain, whatever requirements, it's like, still, you need to remember who you are, why God has placed you where you are. And it was even like, we talked about, like, asking God, like, what do I need to know, or what do I need to know about this situation? What do I need, praying that prayer, and actually asking God, like, what do you need me to know about how you created my body, my physical body? And it took me like years to actually pray that. But once I prayed that, it was so freeing, because it was like, God's like, I made you athletic. I made you with strong legs. Like, don't let the industry, which is, in a lot of senses trying to emaciate men sometimes, don't let that dictate your sense of identity and self-worth. And like, and so it's like, focusing more on God and receiving those words from him. It was so healing. It was healing to me.
No, that's really cool. I'm just, as I'm listening, I'm just trying to think through, I just have like people that are going through my head, that, I can adopt all this mentality myself. I struggle with it all the time, man. Like, being in the industry that I'm in, knowing where I want to have influence. I feel like, I don't want to be a competitive CrossFit athlete. I'm not willing to sacrifice what would what it would take
right.
to make, to improve the last 5% to get there.
Right. Right.
But I love what I do, and I absolutely
Right.
love CrossFit. And I'm always, one of my mentalities is just always to be like, competition ready, for a fun weekend competition or whatever. Like that's kind of my fitness mentality. And I'm about as fit as I need to be in order to do that.
It looks like it from your Instagram, bro. Like you're freaking shredded stud, bro.
But even to that, I mean, dude, even to that point, like there are so many times that I feel like people won't listen to what I've got to say, because the appearance the appearance is not quite as impressive as the other folks that they'll scroll through. Right. And I don't personally care. But it feels debilitating to my mission at times to make an impact in people's lives and to make a difference, because I feel like in order to have a louder voice, I need to be more impressive.
Or sometimes you feel the pressure to care, like you should.
Absolutely.
Yeah, bro. I'm right there with you, man. It's like,
yeah. But even think. Sorry, I was waving at somebody.
Okay, that's okay.
Even thinking through. Just the people, coaching so many, we've got about 200 athletes at our gym, and it's just, I see constantly that same thing be their greatest setback, that they refuse to recognize their sense of progress or the pride that they should have in what they're doing, because they're comparing it to the other people in the room. And not only is it detrimental to their sense of self-worth, it's detrimental to the relationship that they're comparing themselves to, the person the person they're comparing themselves to,
there's envy and jealousy there then.
So so we're talking about the problem. What would you say to those people? I mean, wrestling as you've wrestled with it, are there specific actionable things that you can say that would be helpful? I mean, obviously you've given the shift your perspective a little bit, but are there tactics that you take when that that sense of envy arises, or when that sense of self-debilitation, or the navel gazing, the looking down on yourself? Like, are there specific things that you do to combat that?
I mean, actually a really great, actually. And this was just in the past couple of months. And it actually, it helped answer this specific question, but I did it for other reasons, but I essentially almost muted everybody on my Instagram.
Okay.
Like I didn't unfollow people. I was like, every action causes a reaction. I'm like, I'm not going to unfollow these people, just when everyone was posting and just everything was going on. But I'm like, I had remembered someone had, shared that in passing. Like sometimes they'll just mute people, and you just hold down on the story, and it'll pop up, and you can do mute posts or mute post end story. And so I literally just did that, Jameson, and it's like, and the mental space that was opened up in my mind and my spirit, I was like,
I'm sure.
I can't overemphasize it. Yeah. But as I'm thinking about this specific question, Instagram, social media is a huge comparison trap. And so doing that cut down on my comparison, because now, I muted almost everybody. I mean, I kept a few that I like to keep in touch, or just more news focused, more like, I'll keep Carnivore MD up there. Paul Saladino, want to follow him.
Right.
Or like CrossFit or CrossFit Game, or my dad, my family. But otherwise it's just, now I don't, when I'm scrolling through, because you're playing Russian roulette. When you open your Instagram, you're playing Russian roulette. You never know. I mean, it could be a lust trap, or it could be a comparison trap. It's like,
sure.
So doing that has helped a lot. And then, I mean, that's honestly been the biggest thing.
So maybe we can, in this conversation, discover some of this together then. So I think that tactic is really helpful, because what you chose to do was take responsibility over it, not blame other people for it. So I think that actionably, if you were blaming other people for your perspective issues or your sense of self-worth and the struggle you had with that, then you probably would have responded negatively to them in some way, or you would have just straight up like unfollowed them on Instagram. But instead it's, I'm just going to just turn away from this. I'm going to look away from the thing that is consistently causing problems. So from like, it's the nothing changes if nothing changes. You keep looking at that same picture and that same profile and that same person, and it's initiating this feeling and this response, then mute it. But it's not that person's fault. It's not that person's.
Because,
yeah.
Because the big thing is like, and this is kind of so get to one of your questions or part of it, but you never know what someone's going through. You never know the battles or why they're posting like that or just what they're going through. And so, but it's, all you see is the facade. You don't see what's behind. And, but that facade could trigger you, could, cause a reaction in you that doesn't need to happen. But it's gonna, because it's just like, it's repetition. It's repetition,
Yeah. And I mean, to the point of this entire series that we're in right now with the Be More Human, like we're trying to wrestle with this concept of not dehumanizing people. And to compare yourself to someone's image is to also take their humanity out of the picture. And it's like you're saying, it's to neglect to think about what they may or may not be struggling with at the time. It's to neglect to think about the value that what they're sharing could bring to somebody else. Like you're comparing yourself to another human being, not a picture, not an image, not a standard, but to a person, with probably the same exact issues that you have that maybe just flesh out a different way. And so I think that's so good. I just wonder how we begin to operate eye to eye and in person with that same perspective of going, I'm not going to delete you from my life, but I am going to silence that sense of comparison relationally.
But that's a much better starting place. Like I've been like, if I want to have a conversation or if I want to see what that person's up to or, ask them about certain posts or why they didn't post certain things, I'm going to have that in person or over the phone, and that even, and that, even taking that step is helpful from the beginning, taking out at least the social media. And then at least getting it to, verbal or face-to-face. So I think, and then gets back to the whole idea of thinking small, let's keep it individual,
In those interactions, how can you silence the negative and look to the positive? And for sure. Yeah. Cause I think from both a social media perspective and even just a life on life, interactive, interpersonal perspective, that I think we do have to maintain a sense of clarity on why we do what we do. And so I don't know that I have ever posted a picture on Instagram. I know that I know that I have never posted a picture on Instagram with the hopes that people would find physique impressive. I have posted one time a before and after. And the hope there was not everybody think that this is amazing. But it was genuinely a desire to compel and motivate people to make change in their life, to say like, hey, this is what I did. Like this, to be healthy is not natural, like especially today. That's why functional fitness and functional eating.
It is natural, but I know what you mean.
Yeah. It's supposed to be natural. We've just eliminated the opportunity.
It's supposed to be natural.
Yeah. So in a world that it is now no longer natural to be healthy, we've got to take action towards that. So that's always my hope in my desire to share content, is to inspire people or motivate people. But I think that I have even become jaded in that. And I think before I hit the share button, I always think now, man, people are just going to assume I'm trying to show off. When in reality, I don't even feel like it's that impressive, And so there's even that personal battle of going, I'm not going to be afraid to share my journey. I'm not going to be afraid to share my process, even though I deal with a sense of self on both ends. I deal with a sense of like, self-comparison or comparison to others that cause me to not really feel proud of myself. And then on the other end, I deal with a sense of fear that I think people are going to misunderstand my intentions.
Man, same, bro.
So
Right,
how do you
with
wrestle
you,
with, so how do you wrestle with that? Like, I know that because I assume the best about you having conversations with you. When I see you post, I'm like, oh, John's not posting this photo so people think he's hot. Like, John's posting this content because he's hoping to make some sort of impact that's gonna help somebody live a better life. So what's kind of your tactic, I guess, with that kind of mentality?
I mean, the first step, kind of recognizing that, like what you were just saying, recognizing it, but also like, I mean, it is a constant battle, if I'm honest. And, I talk with, one of my mentors, one of my best friends, a guy named Ethan. He did kind of everything I'm doing now, like 10 years before me. And so he just, a lot of my success over the past 2-3 years has been because he's guided me around, the piles of crap that he stepped in, beforehand. And so allowed me to avoid them. But he'll, that was an aside, but he'll often say to me, my whole industry is, and fitness as well. It's like the point of it is self-promotion. Like that's our job, is to promote ourselves and our brand.
Sure. Right.
So it's like, and that's what social media is for.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of come to a place where it's like, and this is the part of like taking ownership of who you are, first knowing your identity. This comes full circle, knowing your identity, then taking ownership of that, and then just sharing it with the world.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. And, you'll make mistakes and you'll sometimes come across as, overly confident or underly confident, but just sharing, who you are, who God's made you to be. Don't be, it's like, it is a line, and there's the humility and the pride balance, but, God created you, me, John Hipp. God created you, Jameson Price. Like it's our duty, it's our obligation. Like it's to share with the world who we are, and that whole duty obligation, like to make an impact on the world, to help people. Ben Greenfield, I got to hear him in January. He was like, figure out who you are, what you're supposed to do, and then love people as hard as you can with those gifts.
Yeah.
And it was so powerful. Like he ended his talk with that. It's like, love people with who you are. Yeah.
And maybe that's the guiding question, is when it comes down to aim small, focus on the small, own the moment, all that kind of stuff. When it comes down to that, it's maybe just that guiding question of course, you've got to first evaluate, is this consistent to who you are as a person?
Right.
Are these things consistent to your principles and your values? And I know we're using social media as an example, but it's not really the example as much as it's not just on social media. It's when you say or do anything. It's life. Yeah, it's life. And so maybe that question that you ask yourself is like, the results from this are going to be, there will be results from this. Every action causes like you said, every action causes a reaction. And so when you share something on social media, when you say something in person, when you interact with somebody in person, there is that sense of, Hindu karma, but it's just the way life works. It's not karma, it's just reality. Is that result something that you're proud of? And so what you were saying with Ben Greenfield is, ask yourself that question of, is this loving people as hard as I can to say this, share this, do this? Is this elevating and improving other people and the community around me when I share this, say this, do this? And that's true whenever we're being loud about the things that we support, and also being loud about the things we disagree with, being loud about this disagreement and being loud about, and then being loud about this thing that we value and support so strongly, like, is the way that we're doing it actually loving? Is the way that we're doing it actually elevating, encouraging, improving? And so I think that, like you said, it is identifying who you are and then taking that sense of ownership and saying, is the way I'm going about who I am yielding the proper results? creating the right culture around my life. And I think I don't think I ask myself that question enough. I think I've leaned it really heavily into who I am, what I believe, what I am, those things, when maybe I'm currently even like being challenged like right now in this conversation to think like, maybe those are the questions I've got to ask myself more of. Okay. Is living into who I am this way actually the right way, And so I think that's huge. No, that's really good. And I just think it's encouraging for people to hear that their sense of self-worth is not connected to how worthy that looks compared to somebody else.
Yeah. Or what someone else says.
Yeah.
Or doesn't say.
Right.
About you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cause again, I'm so frustrated often for other people and they're just like inability to just think positively about themselves. There are so many people in our gym that should feel so proud of what they do.
Yeah.
They should feel proud every day of what they do.
Yeah.
Regardless of how they look, or regardless of how much progress they've made or haven't made.
Right.
They should take so much pride in what they're pursuing. And I see them do it until that sense of comparison comes into play.
Right.
So,
and that's when it's like, you have to, and it's not the kind of thing that it's once and done, it's just that constant asking God, or, making sure that God is your journeying partner. He is your voice in your ear, not the world, not another person, not, the voice of the enemy. It's God, informing your comparison of who you are with yourself and who he is creating you to be, who he's created you to be and who he wants you to become.
Right. Yeah. The mirror is your identity, not somebody else's.
Not somebody else. Yeah. I mean,
sure.
we can, be inspired by other people and want to, achieve certain things, but, got to be aware of that and how that's.
Yeah. I think that maybe just as we kind of finish up, an actionable couple of things that I think are helpful when it comes to just a sense of identity is to share your weaknesses as much as you're willing to share your strengths. Like you said, regarding the fashion industry and modeling, that the camera sees insecurity, which, I mean, obviously it's not a phrase that I was aware of until this conversation.
It just sees everything,
but
no matter what it is. It sees joy.
Dude, I think, but I think we do too. I think as human beings, we see the insecurity. And so I think maybe the best way to address that is to be honest about it. So like, to just be willing to be honest about those insecurities, be willing to take ownership of them, address them. Again, nothing changes if nothing changes. You can't change that sense of insecurity unless you're willing to address it. And then I think secondly, and I don't know if you have a thought on this, but I think it's also really helpful and powerful to celebrate the success of other people that you're envious of.
100%, man. Yeah.
Have you had that specific experience at all?
Well, I do have an example. I'll share about that. So the one of the leaders, it was a husband and wife of that Models for Christ Bible study. His name is Shane. And he often would say, like, if he was at a casting, you go to a casting or an audition, you do your best, you throw your hat in the ring. And then, when you walk out, it's like, okay, well, it's a waiting game. But he would just, like, if he didn't get the job, he would just be like, and he found out who got the job, he'd just be happy for them. Like, just kind of shift the perspective, be like, man, you know what? Because we're viewing God as our ultimate booker, our ultimate agent.
Right.
Like, that guy needed it more than me. And maybe he had, a kid to feed, or maybe he had some bills coming up that he needed, that this was going to really, get him by. Right. And so, having that perspective and knowing God is sovereign, God's in control.
Yeah.
And ultimately it's like, I think this is a great tactic, what you just shared, celebrating others' achievements. That's a great tactic for defeating the enemy of comparison.
Yeah.
Because if you're happy for someone, if you're, the Bible says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Like, when we do that, it's like it brings up more of a sense of gratitude in us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Gratitude just for the journey and
right.
just a recognition that God is in control.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that concept of, we shared it in the first episode in our conversation. It's just that concept of other victories. Whenever you recognize the arrows from a historical combative battle sense, when you begin to recognize the arrows that other people take as your own, and you experience that pain with them, it also validates your ability to celebrate their victories whenever they win.
Good.
But it's invalid to feel a sense of connection to people's victories and to celebrate that with them if you're not also willing to do the opposite, and vice versa. You can't ask people to understand and empathize to your struggles if you are unwilling to celebrate their victories and their wins. And so I think that's huge, dude.
It's community, it's relationship, it's both ends. It's awesome, man.
Well, I think it's super helpful conversation just in terms of, ultimately just totally just talking about a sense of identity in how you work, how you live, how you see yourself, how you see other people. I think it's huge. And I know that we had other things on the list, but I think we just do another episode to talk about those.
I think so, bro. We covered a lot, but it was good, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. So one of the things that we'll talk about later, as we, continue to have another discussion, there are no rules. We can do as many podcasts as we want with the same guests and as many episodes. So, but one of the things I do want us to talk about, you've been very loud recently, social media, just regarding the issues of modern day slavery, child sex trafficking. And one of the things we want to be very intentional about as a brand, even, and what I want to be intentional about is also being loud about those things, because I think that one of the things that threatens our humanity at the greatest level is the ability to look beyond and past that, to operate with injustice because we're not willing to do anything about it. So we're essentially dehumanizing an entire demographic of children who are actively enslaved, and are actively oppressed.
It's horrible. It's like 800,000. Just quick stats. We'll go in, but 800,000 children in the U.S. alone go missing every year. Over 8 million every year around the world. 800,000 is like it's more than one child every minute. It's crazy.
And
in our conversation, 75 kids have gone missing.
And those are the helpful perspectives that I mean, honestly, we're having conversations about personal identity and body image and motivation and all of that. But man, I think when you start to live with your eyes open towards that reality of 75 kids went missing to child sex trafficking in the time that it took us to record this episode, it's really compelling to deal with our crap so we can start making a difference in those things that matter. It's very compelling to go stop fooling with your body image issues, man. Let's get to work doing something.
Or just perspective, like realizing we don't have anything to worry about. Like that, this is what is really a problem.
How much time are we going to waste selfishly on our non-issues while kids are being oppressed and taken advantage of, and horrible things are happening? And so, let's hop on again, and we'll talk later about that specifically, just because I want to hear what you're learning about that, your perspectives on it, kind of your tactics to making a difference, how normal 9 to 5 or whatever can make a difference as well. Then I know that we're planning to do a combined Instagram live workout and to do the Operation Underground Railroad workout. So
we're going to do that in the next few weeks.
So man, we'll hop back on and we'll do that Instagram live workout. In the meantime, you guys go follow. What's your Instagram handle?
I'm primarily on Instagram, John Hipp, JONHIPP.
Cool. You guys go follow John
up there.
Because not only obviously is he a good follow, good person to be connected to, you guys are being inspired by him, but you're still doing a ton of like at home resource stuff. So
I am. I'm going live, offering some online workouts. I'm doing some collaborations with magazines.
Just Under Armour, right? Too
on Zoom. It's funny. This magazine in Indonesia, the largest fashion magazine in Indonesia, reached out to me about doing a collaboration for their followers.
Perfect.
And then the owner of the magazine has a bunch of travel companies, but he got Under Armour Southeast Asia to be a sponsor. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Well, you guys give John a follow that way. If you are still quarantined and stuck at home, you got those resources as well. You can join him live with workouts and stuff like that. And just kind of stay encouraged by this content he's posting as well. So, all right, bro, I appreciate it. And we'll get another time scheduled to talk about some other stuff. And then we'll post about when we're going to do the OUR workout as well.
Sounds good. Rock on, man.